In today's lesson at the Strategizer Academy, we're going to look at 7 questions to improve your business model design. It's a little bit like going to the doctor, but you're not going to do a checkup of yourself. You're going to do a checkup of your business model. And to do so, you're going to rate your business model or your business model design on a scale from 0 to 10. If you perform badly with your business model design, you'll be more on the left-hand side. If you perform well with your business model design, you'll be more on the right-hand side. And this will show you the strength of your business model design. Which means we're not just going to look at individual blocks, in particular not just the value proposition, which is a crucial part of your business model, but we're going to look at the big picture, how all pieces fit together, because great business models always outcompete great products and great technologies. So to assess the business model, we're going to look at business model mechanics. And with business model mechanics, I mean the inner workings of an organization's business model, which describe how the building blocks of a business model work together to produce a better outcome. That's what we're going to study here in the next couple of minutes. So to assess your business model, I'm going to ask you 7 questions. And for those 7 questions, I want you to answer in terms of, are you performing well or badly? So the first question is about switching costs. Switching costs describe how easy or difficult it is for your customers to switch to another company. So let's look at a first example. I like this example of the iPod. So you might remember when Steve Jobs pitched the iPod on stage, the one big thing that he mentioned again and again and again was 1,000 songs in a pocket. That's the value proposition. 1,000 songs in a pocket. Which is obviously a great product innovation that they were selling through retail to the mass market. And indeed, there was a lot of technology innovation that went into that because it was hard to put 1,000 songs in a pocket at that time. But what most people don't realize is that this was a very, very intelligent strategy to create switching costs. Because once you have 1,000 songs in your pocket, it's actually pretty difficult to get those songs out. In other words, when you put music, a lot of music on one device, it will probably be pretty difficult, if the company doesn't make it easy for you, to take this music and put it on another device from another brand. So you are in fact locked in. For Apple, that meant that they would be able to produce recurring transactional sales. Because you're locked into the Apple system, probably you're going to buy Apple products later on. And in addition to that, they created the iTunes software and the iTunes Store, which allowed them to create recurring revenues from content. What most people don't know is that for a very long time, the content revenues were not that important, but Apple built up this system with the switching costs mainly to create recurring revenues from selling devices, from selling hardware. It's a wonderful example. So how do you perform on switching costs? Are your switching costs very low, so you'd perform a 0? Or are your switching costs very high and you perform a 10? So I'll give you one example. I worked with a company in the hygiene sector, and one of the products that they had was toilet paper. Well, guess what? When it comes to toilet paper, the switching costs are practically 0. That's why these companies invest a lot in marketing and brand, because there are no switching costs. As a customer, you can switch from one brand to another very easily. Let's look at this, the next question, the second question. We're going to look at recurring revenues. Recurring revenues means you need to ask yourself if every sale is a new effort to sell, so that's a transactional revenue, or if it results in follow-up revenues and purchases, which means you would have recurring revenues. Let's look at an example to illustrate this. One of my favorite examples, the Nespresso machine, because I'm a big fan of espresso. So what they did very intelligently is they created switching costs that led to recurring revenues. So the value proposition of Nespresso is probably, we could say, the barista experience at home, but it is composed of 2 things: the Nespresso machines and the Nespresso pods, which you've seen in the image before, that allow you to make a great espresso at home. So the Nespresso machines are sold through retail to households. So Nespresso tries to push those machines into retail channels, because once you have those machines in your home, you are locked in. So they try to acquire you as a customer, because once you have that machine in your household, you can only use Nespresso pods, and they defend that with patents. Well, this year, 2012, or last year, 2012, some of the patents ran out, so it's much harder to keep the customers locked in. Now let's look at what they do with the Nespresso pods. Once you have the machine, you have to go to Nespresso, to their direct channels, their direct sales, buy pods from them, which means you will create revenues for them. And because you're locked in, these revenues from the pods will be recurring. So Nespresso, once they sold the machine, which is a transactional revenue, they will get repetitive pod sales from you again and again and again. Those are recurring revenues. Now look at your business model and ask yourself, do you only have transactional revenues, so you would perform closer to the left-hand side, or do you have recurring revenues that you might even be able to project over years, which would mean you're more on the right-hand side of the scale? Let's look at the next question. Do you earn money before you're spending? What does that mean? You need to ask yourself if you're spending money before money is coming in. For example, for production of products, for platforms that you need to build, etc. Okay? So let's look at an example here to illustrate this question as well. Let's look at the PC industry before Dell came in and disrupted this. This is how the PC industry worked. PCs were manufactured and then, well, obviously produced a lot of manufacturing costs, were sold through retail to the mass market. And in fact, to model this correctly, the real customers of the PC manufacturer is retail, and they earn money from retail who pay them for the computers bought. The problem with this business model is that the manufacturing costs occur much before the sales are ever produced, if they are ever produced, which means there's a big time gap between the time you spend money and the time you earn money. Now, that also leads to inventory depreciation, which can also be a huge cost. Now, let's look at what happened when Dell came in. Let's look at Dell's business model in the 90s when they came into the market. So Dell started selling, we all know that, PCs directly to the mass market. And that produced the sales and the revenues for Dell. But what's interesting in this model is that they started with just-in-time or perfecting just-in-time manufacturing, where they would only start to manufacture very closely to the moment that the sales were produced, which means the costs were just in time, the expenses were just in time, and much closer to the sales. Now this is very, very powerful because spending almost occurs before earning the money. And obviously on inventory costs, that has very positive influence as well, because your inventory depreciation goes down. So these are the business model mechanics that Dell put into place in an industry that worked in a very, very different fashion. Another example, here is our book. When we wrote Business Model Generation, before having a sentence written, a page designed, or anything done, we got people to join us to co-create the book, and in fact they paid money, first $24 and at the end $250 to help us write the book. So we earned money before we had to spend for design, printing, sales, etc. So how do you perform on this question, earning money before you're spending it? Are you on the left-hand side of the scale, or are you on the right-hand side of the scale? Rate yourself. Now let's look at the next question here. Do you have a game-changing cost structure? Now, this is an interesting question because obviously every company has to look at costs. But some organizations have cost structures that are substantially different and better than the cost structures of their competitors. So again, we're going to look at an example to illustrate this point, to illustrate the business model mechanics behind this question. And we're going to look at the business model that this guy here built, Niklas Zennström, together with Janus Friis, the business model of Skype. But before looking at Skype, we're going to look at the business model that telecom operators had for calls before Skype came into the market. So, telecom operators would offer calls through their own channels, often physical stores to sell that, and then installations of lines to a local market. Why local market? Because telecoms can only offer services where they have their networks. At least for a very long time that was the case. And then they would earn revenue streams from selling the calls, either through asking you to pay for minutes or a fixed fee. That's how the business model worked. Okay? Now, to make this happen, telecom operators had to invest in network development and maintenance in local networks to build them up, which required huge capital expenditures. It's not cheap to build networks, as you can imagine. Now, the problem with that business model design is, with these business model mechanics, is that offering calls require a pretty expensive network. So they had to build up all this infrastructure and then only later on make money from it. Now let's look at what happened when Skype came into the market. So Skype started offering free calls, even more powerful, free video calls if you would call from Skype to Skype. What they had to put in place is a voice over IP software that would allow people to make calls over the internet. So Skype requires no network because the calls go through the internet. Obviously, once you start using the internet as an internet company, the global market is yours. So they were targeting users globally. What we have to consider here is that for users to use Skype, they had to have access to the internet. So it's very important for Skype to assure that users have access to the internet, because all the calls go through the internet. And what's interesting here is that this was not a cost that Skype incurred. So they could offer calls for free. So let's look at what's different between a telco operator and Skype. Well, there are no capital expenditures, or not in the same way as in a telco if you look at Skype's business model. What they had to do is develop software that would route the calls through the internet. In terms of cost structure, this is really interesting because software requires lower capital expenditures than the network. There are fixed costs because you have to have great developers and you put a lot of intellectual property in that, but it's a very different and better cost structure to offer calls than what telcos had in place. Another example here, pretty interesting, also in the telecom industry, is Bharti Airtel, a mobile phone operator, in fact one of the very biggest in the world. At a time when everybody was still considering the network as the core asset, the key resource, Bharti Airtel said, no, we're going to outsource all our IT and network infrastructure because that is not our core. The core is offering services to customers. And they performed extremely well on a game-changing cost structure because they got rid of the most expensive thing, the cost structures. So let's look at your business model. How do you perform on your cost structure? Is it very similar to most other companies, maybe a little bit better? Then you're on the left-hand side. Or do you have a substantially better cost structure than your competitors? Then you're on the right-hand side of this scale. Now let's look at the next question. This is in fact one of my favorite ones. Getting others to do the work. So how much does your business model get customers or third parties to create value for you and hopefully to create value for you for free? Let's look at an example. And one of the interesting examples here is Facebook, because Facebook was valued, a lot of money, had a huge evaluation, though when they went to the stock market, they didn't perform extremely well, but their business model is very, very powerful. So let's look at the business model dynamics here, the business model mechanics here. What does Facebook offer? basically, it's a platform that allows you to connect with friends, right? Facebook.com. And it targets users globally. You have over 1 billion users today. So what you really go to Facebook for is not just the platform and to connect with friends, but the content that you and your friends update all the time. So a key resource here is the changing content. So Facebook has to make sure that users change content all the time. What's interesting about this is that it's not them creating the content, but users globally, and they do that for free. So one of the most valuable things in Facebook's business model, the changing content is generated for free. So they get others to do the work. All of us who are on Facebook help Facebook become a very, very, very successful company because we are doing most of the work. They are only, if we may say, creating the platform. That's a very powerful business model mechanism. So ask yourself, how much are you getting others to do the work for you? How much are they creating value for you? Well, if you're doing everything yourself and it's expensive, you're probably more on the left-hand side. If you found ways to get others to do the work for you, and you even get them to become passionate about doing the work for you, then you're on the right-hand side and you perform closer to a 10. Let's look at the next question, scalability. So how rapidly and how easily can you grow your business model without hitting roadblocks in terms of infrastructure, customer support, etc.? The model we've seen before on Facebook is extremely scalable. But I will show you a different example, and we'll go back in history a little bit. We'll look at credit cards. We'll in fact look at the first credit card that existed. First credit card that would allow you to pay in different places. It's the Diners Club. How did their business model work? Well, they were offering credit with a card in several restaurants to salesmen, and these salesmen would invite their customers to different restaurants then in New York. And the salesman would pay a $3 annual fee, which obviously today is not very much, but then it used to, be worth a little bit more. What did Diners Club have to assure? Well, that they would have a series of restaurants first that would accept the Diners card, and then they would expand to other areas. So they had to attract the restaurants, and they would offer the restaurants this idea of access to clients and very loyal clients, which would attract the restaurants, which is the other target segment that they were looking at. And that would allow them to earn money from the transaction cuts from the customers. That's a very powerful business model. It's a so-called double-sided market. Now, this business model is extremely scalable because once you put it in place, once you acquire the customers on the one hand side and the merchants who accept the cards on the other hand side, you can scale it very easily. So how do you perform on scalability? Do you have a business model that's hard to scale? You're more on the left hand side. Or do you have a business model that's very easy to scale? You're more on the right hand side. The last question, protection from competition, in fact, is more of an accumulation of all the other things. So what you want to look at here is how much your business model protects you from your competition. How difficult is it for competitors to get into your market or to copy your business model? So we're going to finish with a last example here, and we're going to go back to Apple again. We're going to look at the iPhone, and when the iPhone was brought to the market, it was really the technology that gave them the early lead. But today, you might even argue it's not the best phone, right? And there's a lot of ideology behind this often, but it's not the technology, it's not the phone itself that's keeping Apple ahead. Let's look at the business model for a second that keeps Apple ahead with the iPhone or with iOS in general, the operating system that runs the mobile devices for Apple. So it's not just the technology that's so powerful, it's the fact that on the one hand side, if you look at the yellow stickies, you have 400 million iPhone or iOS users that come to Apple's business model or to Apple's business because on the one hand they like the technology, but on the other hand, if you look at the orange stickies, there are 400 million. There are a lot of applications available, which is the other side of the market, which you have to get developed to the app developers. So the app developers come to this business model because there are so many iPhone users. These two things in combination, again, what you call a double-sided market, is very hard to copy. If you take Windows with Nokia together, they can't easily copy the business model, whereas they might catch up on the technology. But can they get hundred thousands of developers and hundred thousands of apps on their platform into their business model? That's the harder part. So this is a very interesting and very powerful business model. It's very, very hard to copy, and it goes in both sides, from the iPhone users towards the application developers, and from the application developers towards the iPhone users. The result of this is that today Apple earns about 70 to 75% of all the profits in this industry, though they only have about a 7% market share. That is pretty amazing, and it's a hard business model to copy. So ask yourself, for your own business model now, are you protected from competition, or is it very easy for competition to enter into your market, to outcompete you, or to even copy your business model? So we looked at 7 questions. You looked at the performance of your business model in these 7 questions, and now you can ask yourself how you can improve that. But just don't forget one thing, that even if you score a perfect 10 on all of these, well, that means you have a great business model design, but it doesn't mean yet that the customers will love your value proposition, so you also need market traction. The best business models have both a great business model design and market traction, because customers love your value proposition. And those two together mean wild financial success. You need a great business model design and you need market traction. And if you have a great business model design, I'm pretty sure you're going to outcompete competitors that only have market traction but didn't look at these 7 questions and don't perform well on these 7 questions. So lessons learned. Let's finish off with 3 lessons learned. First one, you can assess and improve the design of your business model by asking 7 questions, by not just looking at individual building blocks, but by looking at your business model mechanics. The second one is, a great business model design alone is not enough, obviously, doesn't automatically lead to success. It's the great business model design and the market traction together that you need to achieve. And the last one, by improving your business model mechanics, by improving the design of your business model, not just your value proposition, you are very, very likely to outcompete your competitors. Let me stop here with a little bit of homework. I want you to ask yourself again, and maybe even for other business models, how is your business model performing on these 7 questions? And how could you improve the design of your business model so you perform better on these 7 questions? Class dismissed.